despite being very much well regarded, I would hesitate to call Castlevania a particularly well-known franchise. While it definitely has quite a dedicated fanbase, most of the series entries are still on the obscure side of things. The way I see it, there are really only 2 Castlevania games I would classify as mainstream. The first of these is, of course, the original Castlevania, the NES hallmark title that set the standard for the rest of the series to follow. And so it's interesting then that the other well-known Castlevania title is also the one to break that standard, while also going on to be considered by many as one of the greatest video games of all time. That game was, of course, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Released for the original PlayStation on March 20th, 1997, Castlevania Symphony of the Night is what many would consider to be the absolute peak of the series, and it doesn't even stop there. If you look up any and all greatest games of all time lists, then there is a good chance that you'll come across this very title, directed by one Koji Igarashi. Certain would mark a drastic shift in the series' trajectory, not only gameplay and structure-wise, but also with a heavier emphasis on story and lore. I first played the game right after finishing Rondo of Blood on Castlevania Requiem, and ever since then, I have gone through Symphony more times than I could count. So if that's not an indicator as to what I think about this game, then I hope that the rest of this video will make it as painfully clear as possible, because Castlevania Symphony of the Night is easily one of my absolute favorite games of all time, which I know is not much of a bold take considering its status, but genuinely it is pretty tricky to finally approach a game which I hold in such high regards. Don't get the wrong impression though, Symphony's got some issues, and I am more than willing to point them out, but it is also a game that personally means a lot to me, and I hope that throughout the course of this video, I'll be able to shed light into exactly why that is. And as for one final note, I'll be playing the game using the quality hack by Paul_Matt, which makes some adjustments making the game slightly more intuitive. The stuff here is very minor, but I just wanted to make my method of play clear. But without further ado, this is Castlevania Symphony of the Night. We begin at the end, or to be more exact, the end of Rondo of Blood, as Richter Belmont is about to face off against the one and only Dracula. I always loved it when sequels begin with the finale of their predecessors, and this right here is an awesome example of that. Of course, having the game begin with the final boss of Rondo would be quite ridiculous game design wise, so this version of it is basically impossible to lose. Quite literally, in fact. If Richter runs out of HP, then Maria comes over and makes him invincible, allowing the Belmont to defeat the Dark Lord without a hitch.
No, it cannot be!
That screen transition is what dreams are made of. 4 years after Dracula's defeat in 1792, vampire hunter Richter Belmont mysteriously vanished, and like clockwork, Castlevania itself appeared out of the blue 96 years early. Suspecting involvement, Maria Renard, again returning from Rondo of Blood, went out to search for her friend. However, this occurrence didn't go unnoticed by all, as it also caused our protagonist, Alucard, to wake up from his 300-year-long nap. Alucard, of course, being Dracula's son, returning from Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, who back then helped Trevor Belmont defeat his father for the price of having to deal with those stupid falling blocks. I apologize. And so Alucard is off to investigate the castle, unsure of what fate may hold in store for him. This right here is an impeccably strong introduction. The game throws you right into action with Richter, then slows down a bit for some basic exposition, and boom, you're in control of Alucard. Beautifully redesigned by Symphony's lead artist, Ayami Kojima, an absolute prodigy, who just pours the most ludicrous amount of detail into every single one of these beautifully handcrafted masterpieces of illustrations. When I think Castlevania, this right here is what immediately comes to mind. Eric Lecarde might have been the first fanboy, but Alucard was the one to truly begin the craze. What an absolute knockout of a character design. Those gaze-piercing eyes, the flowing white hair, the beautiful dark outfit. Oh, I love it so freaking much. Yeah, could you tell I have a type? Off the bat, Alucard is an absolute powerhouse, destroying anything that may come his way with little to no issue. However, it is not long until death intervenes, and the asshole proceeds to steal all of your equipment, forcing Alucard to scavenge for items if he hopes to stand a chance against the castle's demons. And this right here is where we can properly discuss just how radical of a serious departure Symphony of the Night truly is. Up until now, most Castlevania games have been following a pretty simple level by level structure. Early on in its life, we did get some titles such as Vampire Killer and Simon's Quest, which did vary up the formula quite a bit. However, due to poor execution on their part, the series continued to play it safe for quite the while. However, while Castlevania structure remained the same, the industry at large certainly did not. The 90s saw video games transition from short bite-sized ventures into longer, deeper, far more complex experiences, and the PS1 was really the console to cement this, fully embracing the potential video games hold. A game like Rondo of Blood would absolutely not fly with full price on that system. If anything, it made one thing clear: if it wishes to remain relevant, Castlevania is going to have to change. But alright, now that we've gotten the why out of the way, let's head into the how. Starting with what is easily the most obvious change, and that is that, much like Simon's Quest before it, Symphony of the Night takes place in one large interconnected map. The castle is relegated into different zones, all with their own unique enemies, landmarks, and of course, items needed for progression. The whole thing is very much structured like the Metroid series, even supporting a similar looking map. And man, the map in this game is so freaking good. Pressing select instantly displays the whole thing in full, no area regulation, and the feeling of progression received by slowly mapping this entire behemoth out is always satisfying. But yeah, the similarity to Metroid would later help coin the term Metroidvania, usually applicable to games with similar progression systems. And okay, can I just say that naming a subgenre Metroidvania is kinda really dumb? You're combining the names of two games that have sorta similar structure. Castlevania didn't even start as that sort of game, so what gives? It would be like if they called survival horror games Resident Hills, or if they called hard games Souls-like, so wait. So yeah, video game genre naming conventions are stupid. Moving on. While this different design philosophy may be major, I personally believe that this next thing went even further into drastically shaking up the series formula, and that is that Castlevania Symphony of the Night is an action RPG. A lot of people tend to underplay this aspect, claiming that the game only takes minor cues from the genre. However, I'd argue otherwise. Think of any classic JRPG mechanic outside of the turn-based combat. Chances are those are here. Gaining experience points and leveling up? Check. A shop selling a variety of different goods? Check. Various different enemies all with their own stats and unique item drops? Check. An equipment system with accessories that can affect character attributes and give special benefits? Check. Status effects hampering the player's abilities? Check. Magical spells allowing you to turn the tides of battle? Check. A menu with freely customizable background color? Check, check, check. This right here is a full-on, non-stop action JRPG, and I would hear it no other way. Symphony of the Night mixes all of these elements in with many of the traditional Castlevania systems, and the results are quite frankly astonishing. Alucard's movement here is far smoother than anything we've seen prior. Jumps are controllable, giving you just the right height, and while the general movement is a touch on the slow side, I feel, you also come equipped with a brand new dodge maneuver, quickly moving Alucard away from potential danger. And believe it or not, spamming the backdash is actually faster than walking, which is why early on I kinda just find myself backdashing everywhere. A bit clunky, but it's manageable. Now how you attack enemies is also pretty interesting. Alucard is mostly adept to swords, whether they be large or small, though there are a few other offensive options such as close range gloves and and magical rods. Later on, Alucard also gains the ability to jump on enemies by kicking them. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but it is pretty damn fun to use. Of course, each weapon has its own unique stats and attributes. And this is where the game's status as an action RPG really gets to shine. In most turn-based games, picking your weapons mainly boils down to whichever one has the highest numbers. A few of them might come with some tempting unique abilities, but still the earlier rule heavily affects your choice. To the contrary then, in Symphony of the Night, there are so many factors that need to be taken into account. How much range does the weapon have? How fast can Alucard swing it? Does it take up both of your arm slots? It is so deceptively simple, yet hidden behind it is an incredibly deep pool of complexity. And yes, you heard me right just then. This game lets you equip weapons to both of Alucard's arms, each corresponding to a different button. The controls here are completely customizable, so I like having the backdash on L1 and secondary weapon on R1, allowing me to use them both without having to move my thumb whatsoever. And also, by default, pressing triangle acts as the back button in menus, so, you know, might wanna change that to circle in the emulator settings. Now, as enticing as wielding two weapons may seem, you can't actually use both hands simultaneously, so while having two blades specializing in different fields can be beneficial, in actuality, it's more encouraged to allocate a secondary hand for different utilities, primary among them being the shields, letting Alucard block enemy projectiles. There are quite a few of these, all supporting different properties, but generally they aren't really that useful. I personally find it more convenient to simply get out of harm's way, though you can use shields to cancel the backdash animation, which is neat. And they do have one more very broken power, but we'll get back to that later. Another thing you can give to your second hand is one of the plentiful usable damaging items. There are a lot of these here, and the variety is quite frankly ridiculous. Alucard can defeat his foes using such things from shurikens to dynamites to bombs to iron balls, building up to such things as the pentagrams and power of Sire, completely nuking everything on screen. And of course, we also have our usual temporary stat increases and elemental resistances, because oh yeah, this game also has elemental affinities, and with all the gameplay mechanics here, this one is very easy to just outright ignore. The effect this has is so minimal, I'm not even really sure what's the point. Though I guess at the very least it's a neat way of making the enemies more unique. Sub-weapons are also back, with the original 5 still here in full force, though the cross now functions as a semi-useful yet extremely expensive screen hook. Honestly, I prefer the vanilla cross, this one's way too costly for its own good. The Bible is also back, returning from Rondo, working more as a full body shield, which is pretty darn useful. But then we have 3 brand new sub-weapons, and these are honestly all so hilariously stupid, it's kind of admirable in a way. We've got some all-time classics such as the Rebound Stone, bouncing off of walls to deal only the most minimal of damage, the Vibhuti, which throws some salt on the ground, acting as a war's holy water, and the Agunya, firing some lightning bolts at enemies. This one's kinda just awkward, like why would you ever use this? So yeah, the sub-weapons here are kinda just that. Here, they can be useful for sure, but Alucard already has so many means of offense to the point where these tend to fall by the wayside. They are more useful than they were in Castlevania 4, but far less important than in something like Rondo. What I usually find myself using more than these then are the various spells, consuming energy from the brand new MP bar, which recharges over time, and these things are not messing around. You've got simple stuff like Summon Spirit and later Tetra Spirit, sending a bunch of projectiles onto the enemies, but then there's also Hellfire, letting you mimic Dracula by teleporting around the room and shooting fireballs. You even have some self-healing magic like Dark Metamorphosis, allowing Alucard to leech onto his enemy's blood. But why even use that when you have freaking Soul Steal, damaging literally everything on screen and healing you, completely breaking a bunch of sequences. These are all awesome additions, but here's the thing, using these is not exactly simple. simple. As long as you have enough MP, you can use any of these at any time. But the price of admission then is that they all come with their own fighting game-esque movement combos necessary for execution. Similar to Maria's Guardian Knuckle from the PC Engine game. You can buy the scrolls telling you how to use these at the shop. But the neat thing is that if you already know about some of them or happen to use one by accident, then the game will permanently mark it for you in the menu. Some of these, like Tetra Spirit, are pretty simple. Just hold up for a bit, circle back down and attack. But then you've got shit like goddamn Soul Steal, requiring you to look at directions, switch to the other direction, circle back down to the previous direction, and then look to the other direction again and attack. Yeesh. Now honestly speaking, this is a really cool idea, as once you've gotten good enough, you can basically chain spells and create some pretty damn devastating results. But the issue is that the input registry here feels kinda off. I'm not sure exactly how to put it, but sometimes spellcasts can fail even when it doesn't really feel like you messed up, creating some mild frustration. But then again, you never really have to use these. It's mostly just another possible playstyle out of many, which is why I can still give it a pass and say that I am a fan. But okay, believe it or not, we're still not done with Alucard. Yeah, this moveset is packed alright. As you explore the castle, you'll of course find a bunch of useful goodies. Things like equipment, money, life and heart increases, good stuff all around. But the main thing you'll want to keep an eye out for are the various relics. These usually give Alucard new skills and allow him to progress through, even if not all of them are required to beat the game. The effects greatly vary from relic to relic. Of course, we have some standard upgrades, such as letting you walk underwater without getting hurt, making hearts and sub-weapons materialize, and allowing Alucard to double jump. Though this is where I'd like to complain about something. The ability and item descriptions in this game are kinda garbage. A lot of the stuff here you would not know without outside help. After getting the gravity boots, you can press down preceded by up to jump high at the cost of MP. This here is an incredibly useful ability that saves up on travel time, but its description simply reads wearer can jump high, not telling you how to do so whatsoever. Now let's get into the more interesting stuff. Eventually, Alucard also gains the ability to transform into various creatures such as a wolf, a bat, and also a gas cloud for some reason. And I think that these are all also really cool, and they all even come with their own sets of upgrades, meaning that while the wolf may start out being kinda useless, it will eventually gain the ability to completely plow through enemies at the speed of light. The gas cloud is admittedly one I never really found much use for. Don't get me wrong, it definitely does have utility, letting you dodge enemy attacks and eventually even hurt them, but I guess I just find using it to be too much of a pace breaker. Thankfully though, the bat more than makes up for it, providing the simple pleasure of being able to fly, and even dash like the wolf if you know the correct spell. It's cool, even if I do think that many of its upgrades are kinda stupid. You get to shoot fireballs, which is rarely useful, and there's also a radar ability letting you see in the dark, and this more than anything feels less like a genuine upgrade and more like a key, literally only lighting up one dark room in the entire castle. You also get the ability to damage enemies with the radar later, but again, why would you really ever do that? And then finally, we have the Familiars. There are 5 of these in total, all with their own unique experience gains and different means of helping Alucard out. You can only have one out at a time, however, so let's go over our choices. The Bat, Demon, and Ghost are the simplest of the bunch, all attacking enemies in different ways. The Ghost steals enemy HP, the Bat supports you when you are also a bat, and the Demon can hit the switch in the abandoned mine, I guess. However, if you want an offensive partner, then I think many would agree that the sword is your best bet. And I mean, the devs are clearly among these people. As compared to the aforementioned 3, this one has a lot more going for it, supporting a completely unique damaging spell, which is kinda just okay. However, once gotten to level 50, not only will its appearance change, but Alucard will also gain the ability to use the sword as a sword. Again, it's okay. many do consider the sword to be the overall best familiar, and while it can definitely dish out the most damage, personally I've always been more partial to the fairy, which unlike the others actually plays a defensive role, using items for you whenever needs be, even coming with some of its own exclusive tools, one of which lets her revive Alucard with full HP, and it is just as ridiculous as it sounds. She also sometimes alerts you to secrets, such as breakable walls, but I've already memorized all of these by heart anyways. I'm just glad to have the convenience of not worrying about healing, and that right there is basically every single basic gameplay mechanic in Symphony of the Night. Symphony being quite the accurate word, as all of these different elements come together to make an absolutely beautiful gameplay experience. The options here may seem a tad overwhelming, but everything is introduced at a very gradual pace, and once you've mastered Alucard, that's it. There is no going back. This is one of the most unique, diverse, and fun characters you will ever play as in a 2D action-adventure game. But you know, maybe Alucard is just a tad too powerful. As if you know what you're doing, there is really nothing in the entire game that could even hope to stand in your way. There are just too many different methods of breaking this game to count. I've already gone over how powerful some of the spells and items can be, but then we get to the top of the crop, the ways of completely annihilating any possible challenge whatsoever. Case in point, the Shield Rod and the Alucard Shield, two items you can get with no real issue whatsoever. The Shield Rod lets Alucard summon different entities represented by his equipped shield, doing things like giving him buffs or nuking the screen, and if we were to combine said rod with the Alucard Shield, aka the best shield in the game, we can get a shield that damages anything it touches, heals you, and drops hearts. Not only does it deal massive damage, but enemies in this game don't have invincibility frames, meaning that anything that touches this enhanced shield is bound to fall down within milliseconds. Again, this is only one way of tearing this game in half. I'll discuss more of these later down the road, but it's important to note that while this shit is undoubtedly broken, on a first playthrough you're not really likely to know about any of it. Because yeah, when I first played Soten, I actually found it to be quite challenging, and in quite a fair way too. Yeah, the bosses were kicking my ass, but it wasn't because I was underleveled or anything. I just needed to do something that most of this game's players likely haven't considered doing in years, learning the boss's attack patterns and defeating them with raw skill, baby. And so it helps that most of these bosses, as well as the regular enemies for that matter, are all really cool, unique, memorable, and well designed. Soten constantly throws new foes at you, so combat never really gets repetitive. Helping matters is that a large majority of the enemies here are brand new to this game. Magical tomes, frozen shades, snipers of goths, all absolute instant classics. And yes, some sprites may be reused from Rondo of Blood, but the gameplay systems here make these returning foes fresh nevertheless. So the enemies are cool, but the bosses? Oh, these guys completely overshadow them. Not only do Symphony's mechanics just naturally lend themselves to really fun boss designs, but the opponents here are easily the most creative we have ever seen from this series. Early on you'll encounter the Doppelganger, returning from Dracula's curse, and while back then the battle was a broken mess, over here it serves in displaying just how versatile Alucard can be with the right mindset. There's even a rematch against this guy later on, which feels completely justified, as not only have you gotten stronger, but he has as well. Up until getting to this point, it may not have even crossed some players' minds that the fog transformation can be used to evade attacks. So when the Doppelganger pulls that on you, the initial reaction may be one of frustration. Like, come on, how can a boss just dodge my attacks at will? But then you realize that boss is you. You can dodge any attack at will. This game is so awesome! Orlok's Den is a pretty traditional Castlevania boss, but a greatly executed one for sure. You've got an awesome design, a boatload of different attacks, and 2 different phases. I mean, come on, what more can you want? However, the most standout boss in Symphony of the Night without a shadow of a doubt has got to be Grenfalloon. It is a laser-shooting fleshy core guarded by a massive shell of reanimated naked corpses. corpses, and said corpses will attack you on ground level, forcing Alucard to slash through them, destroy the shell piece by piece, and eventually defeat the core. How you even come up with an idea like this is something that I will never comprehend. It is such a creatively messed up concept that somehow results in one of the absolute best bosses in the entire series. Absolute mad props all around. The bosses even give you life increases after defeating them, substituting for the red orbs from the previous games while still giving the satisfaction of a sweet full health refill. But okay, we've been talking about the gameplay here plenty. However, one thing I have yet to really touch upon with much detail is the story of Symphony of the Night, which is something I do think is very much worth discussing, so let's briefly get into that. On his journey through his father's castle, Alucard does occasionally encounter some friendly individuals, people like the ferryman and master librarian. However, one reoccurring character you'll run into is Maria, who, as we've established, is searching for the whereabouts of Richter. Seeing as their goals partially align, Alucard and Maria remain in cahoots, striking conversation whenever their paths happen to cross, though Alucard's reclusive nature tends to cut said discussions short. Eventually, after some time, Alucard does find Richter, who shockingly enough claims ownership of the castle, sending two of Rondo of Blood's bosses to defeat Alucard. This revelation concerns Maria, seeing as she and Richter were close friends. However, Alucard believes he must do what needs to be done, finally arriving at the clock tower, supporting level geometry ripped right out of Rondo, which I always thought was a really neat touch. Some might call this lazy, but come on, this is only a single area, and it does still make for an awesome crescendo, as Alucard finally approaches the top and confronts the Belmont. This is where we learn exactly what Richter is trying to achieve here. You see, as a Belmont, his goal has always been to defeat Dracula, something that he has more than likely known since birth. However, now that Dracula is gone, he no longer really has a purpose. All he'll really be remembered as is just another Belmont, along with the likes of freaking Christopher or something. This is why Richter plans on resurrecting Dracula, so that his battle with him could last for all eternity, so that he may never outgrow his necessity for the world, so that he'll retain his will to live. After all, what need for the shepherd when the wolves have all gone? This here is one of my favorite parts of the story. The idea of an evil Belmont is just inherently one I find to be really appealing, and while he may have gone crazy, Richter's motivations here are still made clear. The redesign given to him also does a great job conveying the shift in attitude. Back in Rondo of Blood, he had this cheery, courageous, upbeat aura, with a sick hair bandana and iconic signature. However, in Symphony, that bandana is gone. He looks older, sadder, more tired. The details here are all spot on, but with that, Richter has been defeated, and the Belmont family is in ruin. The castle evaporates, and Alucard lives saddened to know that much like his father before him, Richter has chosen a life of destruction, one which he knows all too well will never bring peace. And so, Symphony of the Night ends on that bittersweet note, or at least that's a way it could end. You see, much like Rondo of Blood, Soten has multiple endings, and what I just described there is considered to be the worst of the bunch, for pretty obvious reasons, mind you. If you continue to search the castle, there is a lot more to this game, as eventually Alucard will come across the gold and silver rings, allowing him to open his way into the belly of the beast, and it is here where he once again confronts Maria, who's convinced that Richter is being manipulated due to some sort of curse, giving Alucard these stupid glasses, allowing him to sense evil spirits. Funnily enough, you can actually still kill Richter after this, resulting in a different bad ending where Maria is left to search what caused the Belmont to go mad. But whatever, who cares? With the holy glasses, Alucard discovers that yes, Richter has been mind controlled, and by none other than Shaft, returning from Rondo of Blood, even though he did die in that game, but details. The Dark Priest proclaims that he will resurrect Dracula, as he summons the inverted castle, which is literally the exact same castle but upside upside down. These are the sort of things that you kinda learn to accept. So yeah, remember all of that praise I levied towards Richter's character earlier on? Well, you might as well throw all of that in the trash, because mind control it is. A Belmont would never do evil, and man, I don't know. Call me cynical, but I always felt that the scenario where Richter turned to the dark side was a lot more interesting. We've already done the whole possessed Belmont thing back in Belmont's Revenge for the Game Boy, so this is not even anything new. Now you could make the argument that Shaft only used Richter's negative emotions against him, but I am sorry, I will be caught dead in the water before I make the argument that freaking Shaft is supposed to represent the negative emotions of humanity. Come on, it's Shaft. Who actually gives a shit about Shaft? But bleh, I'll come back to the story discussion later. For now, I mainly wanted to set the stage for the inverted castle, which is definitely one of the more contentious parts of this otherwise beloved game. I will agree that this is a pretty evidently cheap way of increasing playtime, having you go through mostly identical areas all over again. Supporting a lot of awkward room navigation, you have to use the bat a lot, which can get a touch repetitive. It's almost as if these areas weren't designed to be traversed through like this. However, if I'm being honest, I do still very much enjoy this section, and for quite a variety of reasons too. Your main goal here is to defeat some bosses in order to collect 5 of Dracula's remains, a pretty clear callback to Simon's quest. And the neat thing here is that seeing as you already have most of the relics, you can basically go about exploring these areas in whichever order you want. And while this can create a few balancing issues, with some sections being potentially overwhelming if approached too soon, the game is thankfully easy enough as to the point where this never really becomes much of an issue. And it's not even like these are exactly the same as the original versions either. Not only are a lot of the color palettes different, but most of the enemies are also entirely unique, once again presenting us with some damn solid variety, and the bosses are, well, again, outstanding. Some of them I do think are a bit too simple for this late in the game, but many others are right up there with Soten's best. The aforementioned doppelganger rematch takes place here, and we also have some stuff like Beelzebub, which functions similarly to Grenfalloon, supporting multiple body parts with their own separate health pools. The battle against the fake Trevor, Grant and Sci-Fi is also like the coolest thing ever. I always appreciated how this game made sure to acknowledge Alucard's role in Castlevania 3, and while this battle is kind of on the easy side, the concept itself is just way too awesome to hate. And the same goes to the stand-in death fight. The second phase is definitely one of his more underwhelming ones, but it's still pretty neat. Now, not all of the bosses here are mandatory. Quite a few of them are just here to give you bonuses, which leads us into Symphony of the Night Super Boss, the hardest opponent in the game by a ridiculously wide margin. This is the one and only Galamoth. Now, to some of you, that name might sound familiar, and that is because Galamoth actually originated in Kid Dracula of all things, where he acted as the main villain, but now he's officially arrived at the main series with the badass new redesign in tow, and Jesus Christ, this guy is not messing around, completely barraging you with a bunch of near unavoidable attacks doing a ridiculous amount of damage. Let's just say that there's a reason the stone on the floor here spells out RIP. Now, if I'm being honest, this battle is kinda bullshit. Like the rest of the game, you can cheese it pretty darn easily, but going in without that knowledge, I feel that it's kinda just more frustrating than anything. Galamoth is way too large, to the point where moving around him is just a mass of pain, and finally taking him down never really felt as satisfying as I think it should have. But still, cool super boss. I do enjoy seeing stuff like this in RPGs. So yeah, whenever I hear people complain about this game, it's usually regarding either the inverted castle or how easy it is to break. But you see, that sort of stuff never really bothered me much. Yeah, it's easy as shit, but only really if you know what you're doing. And I don't mind the inverted castle because it means I get to play the game for longer. It may be a slightly offbeat version of the symphony, but it is still the same symphony I know and love. These are issues, yes, but they don't really affect my enjoyment of Soten. However, there are other things which I do take issue with. and I feel that those shortcomings are far more apparent. So please excuse me as I embark on a tangent discussing many of my issues with Symphony of the Night, and trust me, there's a lot of them. So let's start with some of the smaller stuff as we work our way up. I mentioned earlier that I enjoy using the Fairy Familiar because it negates the need for dedicated self-healing, and you see, the reason that's something I care about is mainly because using items in this game is incredibly inconvenient for absolutely no reason. So let's say you're in the middle of a heated battle and would like to pop off a potion. Well, first of all, you're of course going to pause the game, which annoyingly enough stops all background music, something I am really not a fan of. But anyways, instead of being able to use the potion right then and there, you'll need to equip it to one of your arms and then use it while on the battlefield. And keep in mind that a lot of the items here have a delay after use, meaning that there's a good chance that you will die in the middle of trying to heal. And remember that after you finish healing, you likely want to pause the game again and re-equip whichever item you previously gave to your arm. I absolutely do not like this. I don't think that this is some sort of cool way of increasing tension. I just find it to be incredibly annoying, tedious, and frustrating, being one of the many areas where Symphony of the Night surprisingly lacks polish. And there are a couple of these I have in mind. Due to the PS1's limitations, all of the game's zones had to be connected with these generic copy-pasted hallways, all clearly just being disguised loading screens, something that the devs at the very least had the courtesy of poking fun at, putting a big fat image of a CD right in the middle. So yeah, these are load zones, and I gotta tell ya, after playing through the game as many times as I have for this video, they sure did start to get on my nerve, though the more infamous example of bad loading here is definitely in the game overs. You have to resume from your last save point after death, and seeing as save stations are plentiful and fully heal you when used, I don't personally find that aspect of it to be much of an issue. However, instead of allowing you to continue from the game over screen, the game kicks you back to the title screen, where you'll then need to choose your file, which will then load back your game, which is absolutely yikes worthy. And speaking of yikes, what the hell is up with the teleportation rooms? For a game like this, these are really cool, making backtracking far less tiresome. But you see, instead of just choosing a room to teleport to with a simple menu, you instead have to constantly go through these until you've arrived at your desired destination. But like, why? That is such blatantly poor design. And yes, in the grand scheme of things, this is very minor. However, it does kinda relate to something I've been meaning to get into. Regardless of everything I say here, I do still think that Soten is an incredibly fun game. But you see, here's the thing, the underlying issue of this entire experience, and that is that, to put it bluntly, I don't really think that Symphony of the Night is a particularly well-designed video game. And I know that for many, a take like that may come off as a sort of blasphemy, especially coming from someone who claims to love the game, but there are just way too many poor design choices here to ignore. Let's start by taking a look at the shop, selling quite a variety of goods, with my favorite shop exclusive item easily being Joseph's cloak, which you can freely customize the color of, and that is super neat. There's also an enemy bestiary, which is always awesome to have, alongside a sound test unlocked for beating the game and the returning boss tactic videos from Rondo, which again are all kinda useless. It is neat that all of them were done at level 1, but unlike previously, not only does Alucard often take damage in them, but it doesn't even defeat some of the tougher bosses. After a while, the screen just cuts to black, which is very much lame. Also, for some reason, you are unable to sell any items or equipment. The only sellables are a select few gem accessories that serve the function of being sold and nothing else. So like, why not just replace these with raw money and cut the middleman here? None of this is necessary. But okay, on to more important issues. This shop right here is the only one in the entire game. It's not even in the inverted castle. Now that right there might have not been an issue. That is, if the shop wasn't located in the literal worst spot imaginable. It's in the library, an area that not only lacks a teleportation station, but is also completely separated from most of the zones, only being connected to the outer wall. And like, why couldn't they have put a hallway right here connecting it to Orlox's quarters? It would fill up empty space on the map, would not disrupt any of the game's design, and make the location more easily accessible accessible using the teleport station at Orlox's. Now, there is an item allowing you to instantly teleport to the shop, the library card, but that kinda just feels like a band-aid solution. It's something that, in a better designed game, would not even need to exist. In general, the map design here is oftentimes completely nonsensical. Remember that awesome clock tower area I talked about that you go through before confronting Richter? Well, you see, here's the thing. In order to get to it, you need to use the bat transformation. However, with the bat, you can also just fly to Richter from the Royal Chapel, completely skipping over that entire section without losing anything worthwhile. This isn't even like a cool skip or anything, it is just a path that you can choose to take. Early in the game, there are areas blocked by various gates and switches, providing a shortcut once you have arrived from the correct side. Why something like that couldn't have been put here, I have absolutely no idea. Unlike a lot of other Metroidvanias, it doesn't really feel like the game is cleverly directing you in the right way. You're kinda just stumbling around the castle until you find whatever it is you need. It's not as elegant as something like Super Metroid, for example. Oftentimes, the game doesn't even bother to hide the life and heart ups, instead kinda just throwing a bunch of them on the ground. Why do major bosses give such underwhelming rewards? Grand Falloon is awesome, right? Well, you know what you get for going out of your way to defeat it? The Mormegil, a weapon that is just as strong as the Ice Brand, which you can find only a few rooms earlier. And on the literal upside then, for defeating Galamoth, you just get a few life and heart increases as well as a literal fart cloud, and that is super lame. The game's cooler optional abilities are usually unlocked via secrets, of which the castle has many, and for the most part these are pretty cool. There's the typical breakable walls, which are always a delight to come by, and we also have a few more out-of-the-box puzzles. Stuff like using the stopwatch in the large clock room, or correcting the cogs in the clock tower in order to unlock a door. I enjoy stuff like that. And there are even a few more cryptic secrets allowing you to get some items early, but you will still be able to get them later with a different ability, so the obscurity there is really no issue. However, there is one secret room in this game which is so ridiculously obtuse, I hardly have any idea how anybody found it. It's located in the castle entrance, to be exact, the area with all the mermans. You see this little cave you can break through? Well, what you need to do is go through it with the wolf and then the bat. And for some ungodly reason, doing that will open this passageway over here. There is absolutely nothing in the game even hinting at this. That right there is Simon's Quest's levels of obtuse. And it's important that you get here, because your completion percentage is tallied via how much of the map is filled out. So yes, it's required for 100%, or more accurately, 200.6%. Seeing as the inverted castle has a few extra squares in the underground caverns for some reason. However, that's only completion according to the game's terms. You see, I'm about to go over what I'd like to call true 100%. There are a boatload of rare enemy drops in Symphony of the Night, with a shocking amount of them coming in the form of unique equipment. So my plan was to obtain literally every single one of them, and oh boy was it a doozy. I did make sure to do everything in my power to make the process as painless as possible. Symphony of the Night has quite a lot of cool glitches, but this was always the one I remembered. By using the spell Sword Brothers and then speaking to the librarian, you'll be able to pause the game while selling items. This allows you to equip a gem and then sell it, resulting in the counter overclocking and giving you 255 of the gem instead of 0. With this power, I was able to buy the single best accessory in the entire game, the Duplicator, letting you infinitely use items, including devastating screen nukes and temporary stat increases, allowing me to kill anything in sight and buff my log stat, which affects drop rates. However, even with that at hand, this was still an absolutely excruciating grind, taking over 6 hours. Some of these drops are absurdly rare, and having to constantly go all over the place in order to hunt down enemies really goes into highlighting just how slow the movement here is. It's especially frustrating moving in and out of the different castles. The teleport stations of the two don't connect. You have to either use a library card if you wish to return to the normal castle, or go all the way to the top of the keep if you wish to traverse between it and the inverted castle. Some kind of way to instantly travel between the two would have honestly gone a long way in improving the user experience here. Due to all of that and more, getting through 100% is something I cannot not recommend you doing. Which is a shame, because the stuff you can get here is stupidly cool. The weapon variety here is honestly super underappreciated in my opinion. A lot of them have unique skills usable with certain directional combinations, and how they were able to make all of these as unique as they are is truly beyond me. There are throwing swords, functioning as boomerangs of sorts, such as the award-winning Heaven Sword and the Rune Sword, which when thrown leaves a wind trail spelling out the word verboten, which is German for forbidden. My god, the freaking detail here. During my casual playthrough, I was actually lucky enough to get the Marcel, an explosive fiery blade which leaves behind lasting damage. There's the Murasame, which has its own independent experience growth. The Malbong sword can be used as a better shield rod. The Sword of Dawn summons the dead to fight by your side. The Fist of Tulkas lets you throw out mad punches and fire out a literal Hadouken with the same iconic directional combo. And of course, the most iconic rare weapon in the game, the Chrysogrim. There's no animation for using it, meaning it can be rapidly swung while moving. And thanks to how fast it is, absolutely nobody who'll see it will live to tell the tale. There are a few other tools which also work like this, but the Chrysogrim is easily the strongest and easiest to get, rounding up an absolutely incredible lineup of weapons. And it is a darn shame that most players won't get to see the best of these. I'll tell you what, if you really want to get at least some of these, I'd recommend you play the game on the secret lock mode. It's another one of those cryptic things. You see, for some reason, if you name your file x/x !v!q, then you'll get to begin the game with all stats reduced except for lock, which will be fully maxed out. And the game even starts you off with an accessory that further increases your lock by 20 points. Now you might think that this would result in a far tougher journey, but that's really only the case early on. After an hour or two, your stats should already be more than good enough, leaving you with only an easier time getting rare shit. Now lock mode is pretty neat, but what's even neater is naming your file Richter, which will in turn let you play Richter mode. This is the entirety of the regular and inverted castle explorable as the Belmont himself. Compared to the main campaign, this is heavily dumbed down though. It's a non-canon scenario with no story, meaning that many of the plot-related bosses are completely cut out. And furthermore, there are no RPG elements whatsoever. Life ups fully heal you, heart ups give you 30 hearts, and Danny and Doll money bags are absolutely useless. Richter himself carries over his abilities from Rondo of Blood. Even the HUD is the exact same. Sub-weapons like the Cross and Holy Water once again work as they did in Rondo, though the Bible does still function as a shield. The 3 new sub-weapons are also here, and support item crashes, but honestly, even those can't make this trio worth a damn. However, that's not quite everything, because Richter has been majorly buffed here compared to back in Rondo. Coming with a buttload of new skills, he can now run, freely control his jump as well as his whip. There's a tackle, a slide, a high jump and a slide jump. Yeah, and we all freaked out when he was able to do a simple backflip last time around. All of these abilities are really cool, but again, as stated earlier, I find that inputting directional combos tend to be a bit awkward in this game. And unlike Alucard, Richter requires you to use them to pull off most of his basic moves. Even running, which only requires double tapping the D-pad for execution, is way more finicky than it really should be. Richter himself can be taken down with all but a few scratches due to his low health pool. You're gonna be dying often, and as a result, it's best to save and heal a lot. However, Richter's attack power is nothing to sneeze at whatsoever. The whip is stronger than ever, and a single Hydrostorm can take down almost anything in the game. It is stupidly overpowered here. Now, in order to beat Richter mode, you only need to defeat Shaft in the inverted castle, and there's absolutely nothing stopping you from just beelining it to him. Due to the lack of a leveling system, most enemies can be just outright ignored. For the sake of balance though, Richter's stats are increased when in the inverted castle, but the lack of any tangible character growth means that there is no point in doing anything other than killing Shaft. However, if you do wish to map out as much of the castle as possible, then Richter mode stops being a fun little novelty and becomes an absolute nightmare. Plain and simple, this game wasn't designed for him. A lot of areas areas are an outright pain to traverse through, especially in the inverted castle. Going for all the bosses can be decently entertaining, but mapping out everything is just a complete chore. There's no fun to be gained from doing this. Richter mode is a neat distraction, but really not much more than that. The best thing I can say about it is that its speedruns are pretty damn cool, even if I can't really imagine how much pain you'd go through executing so many tackles in a row. In general, the speedrunning community of this game is really great. I'd highly recommend checking some runs out. The amount of crazy shit people are able to do in this game is utterly absurd and I love it. But alright, we've been talking Symphony for quite a while already. More than any other title in the series actually, and while I have been praising it quite a lot, I'm not sure if a lot here has really shown why this game is so special to me. And this here is a topic I've purposely saved for near the end of this discussion, because I firmly believe that what I'm about to talk about is the single greatest thing about Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And it's something that, for many, might seem a bit shallow, but the thing that truly elevates this title into one of my all-time favorites is the presentation. Because, to put it bluntly, in that aspect and that aspect alone, this game might just be my all-time favorite. The 5th generation of video game consoles marked the true advent of 3D gaming, but despite that, on the PS1, 2D games were still plenty abundant. And while 3D games from that era have debatably not visually aged very well, the exact opposite applies to the 2D entries. The PS1 allowed for some absolutely gorgeous pixel art, and while there are many examples of such titles on the console, I think it's pretty fair to say that out of all of them, Symphony of the Night stands at the absolute top. There are some dated CGI shots of the castle, but those are few and far between. Other than that, it's dominantly 2D, and the sprites here are some of the finest you will ever lay your eyes on. Alucard himself makes that more than evident. His animation set here is ridiculously varied, while also being smoother than actual butter, and the enemies are not far behind. While some of them do definitely look better than others, they all still hold an incredibly high bar of quality, with the bosses completely pushing anything seen prior out of the field. For a 2D game, Symphony of the Night actually uses a surprising amount of 3D for things like enemies, attacks, and background environments, and the result is something I absolutely adore. It especially pops when playing on an emulator, where you can up-res the 3D while still keeping all of the 2D intact. This crap is just way too beautiful for words, and it feels like the game is just constantly throwing incredible new set pieces at you back to back to back without ever slowing down. It's apparent as soon as you begin what a massive upgrade this is. The final boss of Rondo had a pretty decent looking face transition, but over here in Symphony, the entire background gets consumed by this massive imposing void. It is such a cool effect. Just how awesome are those shadows in the catacombs? The swirling vortex accompanying death, the intense cloud storms beckoning from the outside, the beautiful waterfall in the underground caverns, and who could forget the long ominous staircase in the royal chapel leading to the jaw-droppingly beautiful church room. The entire castle here is absolutely filled with life. It's almost like its own character in a way. All of the backgrounds are rich with so much artistry and love. Almost every single room is unique and memorable in its own way, owed in large part to not only the constant incredible set pieces, but also to how much detail is hidden here. If you thought that Rondo of Blood was impressive, then let me tell ya, you have not seen anything. The sheer amount of attention here is absolutely ridiculous. Little things like the moving windows in the castle entrance, or the eye staring you down in the long hallway leading to the outer wall. And speaking of the outer wall, not only does it have a room with an active telescope, but every time you enter it, you can see a bird in the stages of crafting its nest, before eventually laying eggs, giving birth, and allowing the cycle of life to continue. Dude, little things like that add so much life to the game. The confessionary room, where spirits could either bless or attack you, the areas maintaining all of the sub-weapons opens in tubes, breaking into a beautiful swarm of shards and fluid, all the various save screen icons, the dynamic fog in the outer wall, being able to sit on chairs. I love how much stupid hidden shit there is here. Like, did you know that after first arriving at the alchemy lab, you can actually go back to where you first encountered death and battle the first boss duo early? There's no real reason to do it, they escape before you can defeat them. But come on, how can you not admire this sort of stuff? I also appreciate how the game does still have a pretty enjoyable sense of humor, mostly seen via its items. Early on, you can come across the Alucard gear, basically the Chinese bootleg version of the starting equipment. It has terrible stats, but if you rock on the full set, then you do get a pretty substantial luck boost. You can go below the librarian and juggle his chair, as he quite literally flips you off for doing so. This will initially only give you a life up, but if you keep at it, then you can eventually get some equipment, such as the Axe Lord armor, transforming Alucard into a literal playable Axe Knight. It's not very useful, but this is so freaking charming. You can even start the game with this gear if you name your file Axe Armor. Keep in mind that the developers went out of their way to code stuff like this in. There is also an insane variety of ridiculous food items. Alucard can heal himself by eating things like pizzas, burgers, cakes, and peanuts you have to throw in the air and catch in order to eat. You feel that Alucard isn't quite tall enough? Well, then equip the secret boots and witness as he gets taller by just a few pixels. Stuff like that is so admirable to me, that a game like this could have such ridiculous hidden details, while taking you across such incredible jaw-dropping vistas. I am aware that I am coming off as a bit of a broken record here, but I just cannot understate the sheer beauty of this game. And you know what I believe really pulls it all together? What helps turn Castlevania Symphony of the Night into such a uniquely magical experience? You probably already know where I'm going with this, but yes, it's the music. The soundtrack was composed by Michiru Yamane, who previously did work on Castlevania Bloodlines. If you recall, I thought that the OST suffered due to the Genesis's poor sound hardware. However, now we're working with the CD-based PS1, and Yamane was able to use this to her advantage, in turn composing one of the greatest soundtracks the industry has ever heard. Symphony of the Night has bar none the greatest soundtrack in the entire franchise. Not only is the music here as catchy as always, but it also manages to capture so many different tones. Every single song in the soundtrack has its own entirely unique feel, and it is quite truly like no other I have ever heard. When Symphony of the Night wants to rock, boy does it rock. It can get as majestic as they come. It can quite literally capture a heavenly atmosphere. But then later, it also affords the opportunity to jazz it out. It might then slow down, capturing the sheer beauty on display here. But when it's time to get epic, it knows the definition of the word epic. And in my opinion, at its absolute finest, it can bring together an almost tear-jerkingly beautiful melody. undoubtedly one of the greatest musical scores I have ever heard. A symphony truly worthy of this incredible night. My only real issue with it is that some of the tracks here are a bit overplayed. Because of the inverted castle, there are more areas than there are songs for them. So for the love of God, I hope you like the final toccata. Honestly, one of the weaker tracks in the OST. Don't get me wrong, it's still amazing, but it can be pretty frustrating arriving at a new area only to hear that exact same da 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 da. And you see, I always found that weird, because the game actually does have an unused track, which as per course is really good. I'd highly recommend you go check it out.
But you probably won't listen to me anyway, will you?
So yeah, I believe I've already made my case. The presentation carries Symphony of the Night hard, which is not to say the game itself is bad. Heavens no, it's absolutely phenomenal. Inventing a gameplay formula I absolutely adore, but it is the beauty of Dracula's castle that truly turns it into something I could proudly call a masterpiece. However, that begs the question, which version of this masterpiece is best worth experiencing? I initially planned on saving the port comparisons for a different video, but bleh, let's just cover all bases right here, right now. This segment is gonna take quite a while, so if this is something you don't really care about, feel free to skip to this timestamp and continue with the original analysis. But for everyone else, let's get into it. Starting with the original Japanese release, which compared to the version we got has a surprising amount of differences. And thankfully, Gemini went through the effort of retranslating the entire game, supporting the Japanese voice acting and the script far better than Konami's original. So if you wish to do so, you can play the Japanese PS1 version of Symphony in English. Or I guess Dracula X Nocturne in the Moonlight, the game's Japanese title, would be the more accurate way to put it. So let's quickly go over what we got here. Instead of a sound test, there are interviews with the game's Japanese voice talents. And more notably, we have two new familiars, though they're both alternate versions of ones who are already in the game. There's the Devil's Alter Ego, the Nose Demon, supporting just the most beautiful of faces, and the half fairy slash pixie slash fairy but spelled differently. Yeah, her name is pretty inconsistent between releases. She not only has a different color dress, but also whenever Alucard sits on a chair, she has the chance of singing the song Nocturne, and it really is a beautiful lullaby, one which I can appreciate despite not understanding the lyrics, what with them being in Japanese. All of these tidbits along with a whole lot more would carry over into the game's next major version, which was also Japanese exclusive. Released in June of 1998 was Symphony of the Night for the Sega Saturn. Because this port was only ever released in Japan, I'd recommend you get the fan hack by Night of Dragon, which ports over the original PS1 translation, supporting a few nice extras such as some different fonts. Considering how rare Sega Saturn fan hacks are, this right here is an incredibly solid effort, big applause. The Saturn version is a very interesting variant of the game, carrying both the most unique pros and cons. Starting with the negatives, the visuals and sound have taken quite a hit. The game does still look great, but far less polished for sure. Effects like animal transformation are a lot more minimal, and the game has pretty poor transparency, with it using dithering, a technique that when playing on an HD screen does not hold up well. The music is still fantastic, but a lot of sound effects sound pretty poor, and this port is also quite infamous for its rampant slowdown. However, this is where the emulation scene comes to save the day, because despite Saturn emulators not being very advanced, they can run Soten almost perfectly, with sharp visuals and barely any slowdown, and that's a definite point back in its favor. But sadly, the main thing still holding this version back is the absolutely abysmal loading. The game now has a bunch of added load screens, even after the hallways which are supposed to mask the loading. Not helping is that said loading takes forever. Every time I close the menu, I almost fear that the game might have crashed or something, because I'm just left waiting on a silent black screen for a solid 8 seconds. Worst of all though is opening the map, which you now need to do in the menu, taking up even more tedious time. These load times absolutely kill the Saturn some port. And until the emulation scene cracks out a way to fix these, something that I wouldn't bank on happening anytime soon, I can't recommend the Saturn version to certain first-timers. And honestly, all of these technical issues are really disappointing, because setting them aside, this port does make a lot of really solid improvements which do go a long way, making this release definitely worth checking out if you're a long-time fan. Alucard now has a brand new pocket slot. Think of this as a third arm which you can only give usable items to, greatly helping with the game's flow. My favorite new addition would have to be the new relic, the Godspeed shoes, which are received automatically upon entering the inverted castle. They allow Alucard to dash like Richter, drastically improving the game's pace during the entire latter section. The most obvious draw of this version, however, is the addition of two brand new areas. Technically 4 if you count the inverted variants. The Cursed Prison / Soul Prison and the Underground Garden / Hell Garden. Both of these are pretty small and admittedly do kinda feel slapped on, but that doesn't deter from them being awesome extras, because of course new areas also mean new enemies, items and music. The enemies here are all as lively as you'd come to expect from this game, and the items as well are all very cool, with my favorite new weapon definitely being the Alucard Spear returning from Castlevania Bloodlines, which yeah, despite its name was not originally in Soten. Alucard swings it like a sword, which is kinda stupid, but other than that it's as awesome as you'd expect. Also hidden in one of the underground cavern's lanterns is the signed poster, and believe it or not, this was actually related to a real-world contest, wherein the first 15 people to find it and send photographed evidence to Konami would receive a physical poster signed by Ayami Kojima herself. And that right there might be the most obscure piece of Castlevania info I have ever spewed out. The new music is also all great as well, though not quite as mind-blowing as the original stuff. For the new areas, we've got remixes of Vampire Killer, Bloody Tears, and Beginnings. It's kind of a series tradition to include these 3 tracks, and seeing as the game originally didn't have them, it is neat to see them resurface here, all with high quality renditions to boot. And now it's time for some rapid fire random changes I didn't know when to bring up. There is now a sound test option in the main menu. The MP bar is red instead of blue for some reason. You need to get the song lyrics card in the catacombs for the half fairy to sing Nocturne to you. Wing Smash will let you dash indefinitely until you hit a wall or run out of MP. You can keep the spell up by casting it over and over in some versions of the game, but here it does it for you, making it overpowered as hell and really fun to abuse. Richter mode now begins with the Belmont dashing to the castle on horseback, as opposed to the original version where it kinda just appeared there. Also, during Alucard's campaign, Richter has a different sprite reflecting his older design. And finally, but most importantly, in the castle center, before Maria can give you the holy glasses, she'll battle Alucard to test his might. This fight doesn't really make much sense in story, but it is an awesome gameplay addition, with an incredible new boss team in tow. I especially love how it keeps playing after the battle, as Alucard triumphantly makes his way out, ready to confront Richter. It's so goddamn epic, I love it. This battle against Maria is notable, because in the Saturn Symphony of the Night, along with being a boss, she is also a completely new playable character. This part seems to highlight that aspect a lot more. Not only do both Richter and Maria have unique castle entrance themes, but also instead of Richter mode being a secret, it, along with Maria mode, is proudly presented as an option as soon as you start a file, which I always found to be odd, as it makes it seem as if all 3 of these characters support similar death, which is absolutely not the case. Alucard is the main course, with Richter and Maria purely being side dishes, because yes, structure-wise, Maria mode is the exact same as Richter mode, meaning that most of my issues from there do carry over on here. The only major difference is that Maria, of course, handles much differently than Richter, And with Richter carrying over his utilities from Rondo of Blood, you'd likely expect Maria to do the same. Expect being the key word, because that is not the case here whatsoever. At base, Maria supports a lot of mobility. She can run and slide like Richter, backdash like Alucard, and can even execute not just a double jump, but a triple jump. Supported by the stand-in high jump which all the characters have. Her physical means of attack rely on kicks. These have short range and deal decent damage. There's even this awesome dash kick, which is very fun to abuse. A lot of her sub-weapons are also enhanced. She doesn't have access to item crashes, but things like the axe and holy water are a lot more potent when used by Maria. Helping matters is her ability to hold up to 999 hearts, which is completely and utterly ridiculous. All of that is nice and all, but the thing that makes Maria in the Saturn version easily the strongest character in all of Soten are her absolutely insane spells. She's got a Mega Man-like charge shot alongside the returning Guardian Knuckle, now being executable with a simple quarter circle, but then we get her ability to channel the 4 sacred beasts, letting her do things like summon an owl familiar, shoot out a burst of flame, send a controllable dragon to decimate the screen, outright heal herself, and best of all, when channeling all 4 of them, she becomes outright invincible for a ludicrous period of time. With a nice detail being that this is actually the same spell she uses on Richter if he runs out of health during the Dracula fight, which I find to be really neat. Now yes, the spells all come with annoying directional combos, and they do cost MP, but Maria's MP regeneration is so quick to the point where that's not really an issue. I still don't really enjoy this mode much, mostly due to me not being a fan of the structure, but I will admit and say that absolutely demolishing enemies with Maria is very enjoyable here. And with that, we're finally done with the Saturn version. Yeah, it adds a lot, alright. Thankfully though, the next port of Soten will be far easier to talk about. Released on March of 2007 was Symphony of the Night for the Xbox Live Arcade. This is just a simple port of the PS1 version, leaving me with very little to say about it. I definitely wouldn't consider this to be my go-to version of the game. There's an annoying border you can turn off, and the Xbox button prompts look kinda cheap. Also, for some reason, they replaced the ending theme with Admiration of a Clan, which isn't even an original track, it's from Lament of Innocence. So that kinda goes to show you how much budget this release had. But other than that, this is a completely serviceable way to play the game, and I am glad it was made when it was, because thanks to Xbox incredible backwards compatibility, you can play Symphony on any modern Xbox system, making the game far more accessible. The next port then would come out later that same year, and unlike the Xbox version, this one is quite noteworthy. Released on October of 2007 was Castlevania The Dracula X Chronicles, a remake of Rondo of Blood which just so happened to include Symphony of the Night as an unlockable. This here is a very bizarre version of the game. It is largely based on the Japanese PS1 release, including both of its unique familiars. We still don't have the voice actor interviews in English, but what we do have is Nocturne in English, which is awesome. I love this version of it. This does also mean that the English translation has been revamped, supporting brand new voice actors. The opening crawl is narrated and the ending theme is completely different, but I'll come back to those details later. Unlike the Saturn version, this one runs fantastically, supporting the least amount of lag so far along with barely any load times whatsoever. Though the screen is slightly zoomed in, colors a bit washed out, and there's an annoying forced border. While this port looks great when emulated, on original hardware it is blurry as hell. Trust me, I would know. Thankfully nowadays we have the PS4 version, being largely based on the PSP one. I'm sure that many won't agree with me here, but this is my pick for the best official way to play Symphony of the Night. It looks really sharp, has 4K support, HD 3D models, and you can turn the border off. Really, my only major issue with the PSP port is that I wish it took more from the Saturn version. I can see the argument for things like the new areas not fitting in with the game's original design, but some other things like the pocket slot and Godspeed shoes are just straight up improvements, no way around that. This could have been the definitive Soten experience, but as it is, the Saturn version is still technically the most complete one, load times and all. I think a big reason why this bothers me is because this port does take one thing from the Saturn version, that being Maria Renard's role, as she is once again playable and you once again get to battle her, though the Maria fight here is completely different gameplay-wise, and it doesn't even have the awesome music, which really blows. This battle has been reworked because for some reason, Maria on the PSP plays absolutely nothing like she did on Saturn. Yeah, you can tell that the people behind this port really did not like the Saturn version. Here Maria is a lot more similar to how she was in Rondo of Blood. She attacks enemies with doves, and the sacred beasts now once again act as sub-weapons, all coming with item crashes. Maria also has the neat ability of being able to hold on to 2 sub-weapons at a time, which helps in a pinch. Though it sucks that the Guardian Knuckle is a sub-weapon now, as opposed to a native ability usable at will. The best part of PSP Maria is just how nimble she is. Being the fastest mover on ground, having a high jump which lets her float, 2 different types of slides in the dash corresponding to the direction of the bombers, and all of this allows for some truly satisfying movement. However, Maria's biggest issue here does kinda make fast progression impossible, because not only are Maria's attacks super weak, but she also has by far the worst defense out of any character. Her sub-weapon abilities are really good, but they're also really expensive, and seeing as you can only carry up to 99 hearts, you will more than likely find yourself in poor situations. In contrast to her Saturn iteration, PSP Maria is by far the weakest character in all of Soten, and while there is definitely appeal in the lighter playstyle, when bosses can take minutes on top of minutes to defeat, then I'm not sure if the pros really outweigh the cons. I don't dislike PSP Maria, but honestly speaking, I did have a more enjoyable time with the Saturn iteration here. So with that, the PSP version is behind us, and all we have left is Soten's most recent port of the time of this video's release. Released in March of 2020 was, of course, Castlevania Symphony of the Night for iOS and Android. This version kinda just baffles me more than anything. If this was made back in 2012 or something, fine, I'd get it. But 2020? Why did Soten get ported to mobile in 2020? By that point, I figured most companies realized that porting console games to phones 9 times out of 10 never worked. And yes, this does in fact not work. Symphony is a game that relies on you pressing a buttload of different buttons. You can't just plop it onto an ugly touchscreen interface. Imagine trying to execute spell commands on a digital D-pad. Well, for what it's worth, at least the menus have been redesigned to accommodate, and there is thankfully controller support if that's something you're into. But personally, that seems like a hassle more than anything. The game is once again based on the PSP version, and for what it's worth, it looks nice. Not as good as the PS4 port, but still nice. So yeah, those are all the major versions of Symphony of the Night. In conclusion, I really don't think you can go wrong with any of these, well, aside from the mobile port at least. If you're looking to play the game for the first time, I'd recommend you get either the PS4 version, or just emulate the PS1 game on that station. And if you already like the game and are looking for a replay, then the Saturn version has a lot of really cool extras, keeping a second playthrough as fresh as you'd want. Say what you will about the Saturn port, but it has heart. Something I can't say about the mobile version, or really even the Xbox version. But with that, I believe there's only one thing left to discuss before finally wrapping this piece up. So, let's return our conversation to Symphony of the Night story. This is something that's pretty interesting to talk about, because when discussing Symphony of the Night, I feel that most people kinda just glance over it. However, I do know of one person who seems insistent that this plot is truly something worth caring about, and that person is none other than its writer, Koji Igarashi. Almost a year ago now, when I watched that Castlevania Chronicles interview, I remember being quite surprised when Igarashi hailed Soten's story as being one of its highlights, and the same thing happened again when I saw his reactions to speedruns of the game.
So, what'd you think?
どうでしたか？どう思いましたか？
早すぎ。話全然だって進んでないもん。
He's like, that was too fast. You don't even see what's going on with the story, man. We worked so hard to create. It's a great story.
This seems to be something he is truly proud of, which is why I think it's fair to give the plot here its turn in the spotlight. I already went over the potential which Richter's character had, but now I'd like to discuss the two individuals which Symphony of the Night fleshes out the most. Alucard and his father Dracula. Throughout the game, Alucard is often presented as a pretty reclusive individual. While he does strive to do what's good, he still carries a loner attitude with him, never being one for conversation. However, there is a moment here where Alucard is shown to convey genuine emotion, and it's a moment I find to be one of the game's most memorable. In the underground caverns, you'll eventually come across a weird purple save station, and going into it will teleport Alucard into a nightmare. A nightmare of the moment when his human mother Lisa died in front of his very eyes. It's quite the gruesome visual of her being prepared to be staked alive, an action commonly associated with committers of witchcraft. And seeing as Lisa did marry and have a kid with Dracula, you can see why the old times townspeople would put her to the stakes, much to the dismay of her family. This scene, however, is soon revealed to be only the conjunction of a succubus trying to feed off of Alucard's despair, though the half-vampire does soon make short work of her. While this moment may be brief, it carries with it a lot of weight, and by the end of the game, it all becomes clear. The reason Dracula sought revenge against humans was because they executed his wife. This then led into the events of Castlevania 3, when he first took out destruction. However, unlike his father, Alucard knew of Lisa's dying wish, that Dracula may not seek revenge against humans. This then prompted Alucard to team up with Trevor Belmont and defeat his father. However, this also put Alucard in great sorrow, as not only did he lose his mother, but his father has lost himself, and that's what led into him sending himself away, as he believed he would just be another blight on humanity. However, he did still respond to his call to action, fighting to maintain his mother's dying wish and stop his father at all costs. Going by all of that, this here seems like a really solid story. There's some great characterization for two people who previously didn't have any, and I do believe that it does manage to stroke some really good emotional beats. It's not amazing, but I do honestly think that this story is a very good one. Easily the best in the series yet, supporting some incredibly intriguing world building. But now that begs the question, why is this plot not as fondly remembered as I believe it deserves to be? Well, honestly, it's for pretty obvious reasons, and they mostly have to do with how the game was brought overseas. Firstly, the English translation is very much wanting, with occasional typos and a lot of really awkward conversations. Most of the game's additions to the series lore are also told via subtext, which will more than likely go over the heads of those not familiar with the franchise. However, those are not the main reasons people don't care about this plot, and this right here is easily the biggest elephant that has stood in this room throughout the course of this entire video. So yeah, it is finally time for us to talk about what this game is most well known for nowadays.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world!
It was not by my hand that I'm once again given flesh. I was called here by humans who wish to pay me tribute.
Tribute? You steal men's souls and make them your slaves!
Perhaps the same could be said of all religions.
Your words are as empty as your soul. Mankind ill needs a savior such as you.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. How about you?
Symphony of the Night was the first installment in the series to feature full English voice acting, and it is notoriously poor, with the opening argument between Richter and Dracula being remembered as a meme of sorts, poking fun at English video game dubs from the late 90s, and you know, I'll give it that, it is pretty darn hilarious. I remember that entire conversation by heart, I love it. And many other characters such as the Demon, Librarian, and Succubus also provide a lot of lines I am quite fond of.
A switch. Why don't I press it and see? Thank you. Wait, I beg of you.
Overall though, I don't think that the voice acting here is quite as bad as most make it out to be. Don't get me wrong, it is not good, but comparing it to stuff like Mega Man X4 or the original Resident Evil, I think that it is easily superior. While performances such as Richter and Maria definitely leave a lot to be desired, Dracula, and especially Alucard, I actually think are quite solid. However, the legacy the acting left the game's story with is one of infamy. It's kinda hard to take some moments seriously when you can't help but laugh your ass off every other second. And while I do love the acting for how funny it can be, I also think it's a bit unfortunate how much it overshadows the game's legacy, because the story here is a lot more than just what is a man, and I'm glad that with the making of this video, I was able to finally see that. In the PSP version, they did completely redo the English voice acting, and while you'd hope it would, for a lack of a better term, fix the story, I honestly don't think that to be the case. The script is for sure a lot more refined here, making a lot of scenes far less awkward. Honestly though, and this may come off as a shock to some, but I prefer the original voice acting, both ironically and unironically. Technically speaking, yes, the remastered voice acting is better, but it is still far from great. It's just bad in a boring way instead of a funny way, and one performance I think is outright better in the original version is that of Alucard. In the newer releases, they give him a far higher pitched voice, and nothing against his voice actor Yuri Lowenthal, but I think that Robert Belgrade just fits the role far better. His performance might seem a bit wooden at first, but when it comes to the emotional scenes, he does make Alucard convey, well, emotion, whereas in the PSP version, that contrast doesn't get sold quite as well. At the end of the day, Alucard is a very muted and depressed individual, so I think it's fair to say that the guy who does Spider-Man and Ben 10 isn't exactly the best fit. So that, combined with the original acting simply being far more iconic, does make that dub far more desirable to me. And also, I'm sure the Japanese acting is solid, but I personally don't really care for subs, so I can't comment on it much. Sorry, not sorry. But alright, let's go ahead and do this. The final act. With all 5 of his father's body parts acquired, the tragic prince is at last ready to face off against Shaft, who I still don't give a shit about. And he's hilariously easy to take down anyways. Why they put this battle right at the end of the game, I have no idea. And so Shaft dies again. However, despite everything, Dracula's resurrection is still successful, meaning that Alucard is tasked with defeating him once again. Much like Shaft, this final battle is kind of on the easy side. Not as pathetic as Shaft, but still, if I'm honest, a pretty forgettable final confrontation, with Dracula kinda just sitting there as you slash away at him. The guards outside this room are honestly more of a challenge than this, but well, I already bitched about the difficulty earlier. But with that, Dracula is once again put to the sword, as Alucard proclaims that he's been doomed ever since he lost his ability to love. This then prompts Dracula to quote Matthew for some reason before asking what Lisa's final words were, with Alucard fittingly telling him that she wished for him to not seek revenge.
She also said to tell you that she would love you for all of eternity.
And with that, Dracula is at last defeated, with both of the castles properly disappearing. What follows then is one final scene, with the trio of Alucard, Richter and Maria overlooking the castle's remains. Despite everything, it is made evident that Alucard is pained by what he has done. Claiming that his bloodline is cursed, he vows to seal himself away forever, leaving Richter and Maria while bluntly proclaiming that they will not meet again. What happens next then is actually dependent on how much of the map you've completed. Usually Maria will just leave Alucard to be, but if you've gotten at least 196% of the map covered, then Maria will instead chase after Alucard so that he may not disappear. I think the game kinda implies that she's developed a crush on him, which is weird, but I personally prefer to see this scene as her trying to save him. Alucard is pretty evidently shown to hate himself due to his heritage. Like his father, he has lost his ability to love. However, it is still not too late for him, as we are left hopeful that he may finally find happiness in life. And after going through this entire journey with him, I think it's kind of impossible for the players not to want the same, because more than anything, Alucard deserves happiness. But what happens next is not for us to know, because that ambiguous note is where Symphony of the Night ends, as we are left with only the credits, accompanied by the vocal track I Am the Wind sang by Cynthia Harrell. Much like the rest of the story, this track is kind of an infamous laughingstock. And at face value, yeah, having a Castlevania game end with this corny ballad seems incredibly awkward and out of place. And while the PSP ending theme, Mournful Serenade, is probably the better song, for this game, I Am the Wind will always be the superior ending theme, because when actually taking the story into account, it becomes evident that the lyrics here are a representation of Alucard's character, his faith, his will, his inner struggles, his perseverance. For me, it turns the song from an off-putting final showing into an absolutely gut-wrenchingly beautiful track, one which I am not ashamed to say that I adore, and that's really the perfect encapsulation of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, one of my absolute favorite games of all time. Symphony of the Night is an absolutely beautiful work of art through and through. Like everything, the game's not perfect. In quite a lot of areas, it is very much lacking in polish. Menus are awkward, difficulty is unbalanced, and level design is very much subpar. However, for me, that doesn't distract from just how much this game does right. It invented one of the most rock-solid formulas I have ever seen, with constant fast-paced progression ensuring that the game never gets boring, along with an absolutely insane sea of different abilities and playstyles, and all of that is presented via the absolute most beautiful 2D pixel art ever conceived by man, combined with incredible attention to detail and amazing music that makes every single corner of the castle absolutely brimming with life. And it's all topped off with a story which not only expands the series' mythos, but gives us our first ever example of actual character, turning Dracula's age-old hatred of humanity into something worth caring about, while also giving us a protagonist who allows us to see this conflict through a completely different set of lens. My love for this title is something that's hard to put into words. This here was a script which I almost dreaded writing, because I always knew that it was important for me to get right. So at the end of the day, I can only hope I was able to show you just why this game means so much to me. As a game, I don't think it's the best in the series. The argument that Rondo of Blood is technically superior is very much a valid one. Game design wise, it is a lot tighter, but looking at it purely as an experience, I don't think that anything in this series will ever top Symphony for me. So if you for some reason haven't yet, please check this masterpiece out. It would honestly mean the world to me if more people got to experience it. So I guess at the end of the day, all I can really say is this. To all who took part in this game's development, thank you. You took this series which seemed to fear innovation, and made with it a product that would go on to change lives. So if that was the intent here, then I think it's safe to say that I was one of the lucky victims of this incredible experiment. But with that finally behind us, we can properly look forward into the future, as Castlevania is about to embrace the third dimension. However, before that can happen, we have one final original game in the series to follow the original formula. Next time, it's Castlevania Legends for the Game Boy. For now, thank you all so much for watching. Putting this whole thing together was an absolutely ridiculous undertaking, so I hope you enjoyed the end product. As always, feel free to leave your thoughts down below. And until next time, please, with all due, have a good one.